Everybody, the Simple Handicap for Tuesday, December 10th. Thank you for making me a part of your morning, and we are straight ahead to NFL Week number 15, and we got a full slate. So I'm going to get right to it with the market rundown for this Tuesday morning to get you on your way with 16 games ahead on the card. Things start out Thursday night football, a great one. I'm loving these NFC West battles. We have the LA Rams on the road at the San Francisco 49ers. Call it a elimination game for all intents and purposes, as we are going to see the loser of this game effectively have their playoff hopes ended. The winner stays alive. This is a game that we have seen go back and forth. Initially on the reopen yesterday, we saw 2.5 bet down to -1 as the LA Rams survive against the Bills, take on a lot of attention. San Francisco revitalized in their win against the Chicago Bears, and we have seen this number creep back up. I think a couple things are driving this. First and foremost, even with Williams and Bosa not participating in practice on Monday in the walkthrough, and the expectation and the estimation was that both were still DNPs, an interview of George Kittle from his post-game press conference started to make the rounds. And what we saw from that press conference was George Kittle talking about a closed-door meeting that took place for the team before the game where they played against the Bears, talking about desperation and everybody buying in. We saw the best effort of the 49ers all season, and the reflection on that by Kittle kind of gives you insight that, hey, this Niners team not done yet. And we see that number start to come back as that clip starts to make the rounds. I think it's an interesting insight of what we see behind the scenes for this 49ers team. In terms of the film review and everything that has come out from the Rams game, it was wildly impressive from Matthew Stafford. It was another one of those just amazing games, but so many of the big plays came against very good coverage for the Buffalo Bills. Matthew Stafford in that performance from an EPA perspective is up in terms of the last 25 years of quarterback play, near the top. I mean, it was an incredible performance. Some of the throws that he made, watching them back from the end zone view in the All-22, wildly impressive. And so perhaps we're seeing this as it got lower, kind of a disagreement. Now you know a little bit more about what's happening behind the scenes for the Niners, I think having an impact on this number. Moving on to Sunday, Washington on the road at the New Orleans Saints. As we talked about on the Sunday night opening pod, no Derek Carr for this game. Now, he's not officially on IR, was deemed to be not a candidate. Significant fracture in his non-throwing hand. He's also in the protocol. I think his season is over. The Washington Commanders don't have any word out yet about the status of Marshawn Lattimore. That's something I would keep an eye on. Jamison Crowder's 21-day window opens this week. Unclear if he is going to be able to play. Commanders coming out of the bye. Took money at 7, now out to 7.5. Miami on the road at the Houston Texans. Texans a soft 3-point favorite, with FanDuel showing 2.5 -120. If you have a FanDuel account, you're looking at that 2.5. I think that's worth taking. Now, there could be disagreement here at 3. I certainly think this is a great spot for the Houston Texans. There was a press conference with DeMeco Ryans that took place last week where he was asked about the bye, and he said that this is a much-needed reset for the team. Perhaps forgotten about was the Texans starting training camp. It's team number 1 in the NFL. Back in July, started earlier than everybody else because they had the Hall of Fame game. They got going just before the Bears did. They also have the latest bye of any team. And so the Texans have been going longer uninterrupted with practices and preparation on a weekly basis than any other team in the NFL. So this bye week for Houston was about rest, was about rehab, and all of the discussion internally is about a reset for these teams. We'll talk tomorrow about how some of the rating systems get to a point where a lot of this number can be justified, but you're thinking about the misleading nature of the box score for the Dolphins win over the Jets, and this potentially revitalized Texans team that is taking on the next 3 weeks, calling it the Gauntlet. It seems like a much big refocus and a much needed refocus for a Texans team that's been struggling a little bit coming into the bye. Have a feeling they show very well come Sunday. Jets on the road at the Jacksonville Jags. Jets money holding this number up at 3.5 so far in the market. Total in this game, 39.5 on the look ahead. Reopens 40, still holding there across the board. Cincinnati, Tennessee, still off of the board with the Bengals playing last night. We'll get a reopen on this game a couple hours from now this morning. Baltimore on the road at the New York Giants. Ravens taking on money. And it makes sense. What was 14 on the reopen is now up to 15. Big favorites have not trended well this season. The fact the Ravens are getting bet this early in the week, pretty telling. From the Giants' perspective, Drew Lock banged up and dealing with injuries. He's labeled as sore, but expected to play. 2 offensive linemen lost for the Giants, won't be playing in this game. We know Dexter Lawrence last week was lost for the season. Other defensive injuries. This is a Giants team that is completely banged up. We have Daboll, far less aggressive, calling run plays when typically he'd be calling pass plays, the change in coaching philosophy, call it what you will. It's a much different Giants team the last couple of weeks than expected. They continue to fade down the stretch, and the Ravens themselves, similar to the Texans, out of a much-needed bye week, taking money so far. Kansas City on the road at Cleveland. Oh, that was just a kick in the shins of a season, quite frankly, full of them on Sunday night. That was a very frustrating loss. Was ahead of the McConkey stuff, was ahead of the Humphrey stuff, was ahead of the close, got the confirmation late. I felt so good about the Chiefs side on Sunday Night Football. And at halftime, I was over the moon. I mean, the way that was trending looked so good. And then it was just a matter of minutes, and it flipped, and the Chiefs were done. That was... would have got the service to 40-30 on the season. There was so much tied into that. That was a killer for me. Just brutal. And now we see the Chiefs go on the road to Cleveland. Interesting market so far. Chiefs opened 5.5, which is adjusted down 0.5 point from the look ahead. They're now down to -4 across the board. This total, amid a couple of other totals so far this week, get the impression there was a little bit potentially of a fake going on in this game, as we saw the initial reopen of 43.5 get bet down slightly. And I mean, the tidal wave of over money that came into the market yesterday from 43.5 up to 46. You think about it, it makes sense because it's a Chiefs defense that has real problems in the secondary. Chargers were without Ladd McConkey. They lose Will Dissly at the end of the first half. Still without J.K. Dobbins, who got hurt a couple weeks ago. I mean, you're talking about pass catchers 1 and 2, running back number 1. Dobbins has contributed a lot in the receiving game as well. And the Chiefs didn't have an answer. And we're lucky that some of those big plays were not capitalized by Herbert on some missed timings and some overthrows. You think about Jameis and what he's delivering for the Browns. Is he going to turn it over? Sure. Chiefs aren't forcing a lot of takeaways, but you think about the big play potential that could be there for Cleveland. And now the Browns without Newsome at cornerback as he's dealing with a hamstring injury. And the nature of their defense that's been boom or bust. It makes sense to see this total get bet over, certainly as the weather in Cleveland looks okay come Sunday. But man, what a move for a Monday morning and Monday afternoon wave of money on a total. Dallas, Carolina still off of the board. Pittsburgh on the road at the Philadelphia Eagles. Eagles from 5 down to 4, -15 at Chris, 4.5 at Buckeye, 5 flat at Circa. Everywhere else, somewhere in between. It was Steelers money coming in after a little bit of Eagles money pushed this up to 5.5. Pittsburgh money then hit the market and brought this number down. The total from 45.5 down to 43.5 with under money coming into the market. The Eagles, and specifically A.J. Brown, have a lengthy history in the Jalen Hurts tenure with Nick Sirianni of the squeaky wheel narrative coming through in games where it is deserving to be so. I would be very surprised if we do not see these A.J. Brown props get hit pretty hard upon reopen, as the words that he had for the passing game and the trouble, and then you see some of the film and the clips where he's running wide open and Hurts isn't even looking at him, let alone considering throwing the football to him, and then Hurts kind of jabbing back. This happened last year. It's happened other seasons as well, and it comes through very often. And so it's not a Kendre Miller situation like we picked up on last week. In terms of the laundry list of day after pressers that we have seen, that certainly stands out as the most actionable info coming up this week so far. I'm sure there's going to be plenty more. Buffalo on the road at the Detroit Lions. We bet the Bills and released it yesterday. I think this is a fantastic spot for the Buffalo Bills going on the road. 2.5's taken out. This is now down to 1.5 at Chris. 1.5 at Buckeye, Circa the only 2 left on the board. The total smashed over, 51.5 up to 54. Early to know on some of the Lions' defensive injuries. Have to wait and see and keep an eye on that. A little early to know on the Bills' offensive injuries to Kincaid and Coleman. We'll see how those trend out. Certainly lots to look at on both sides. The total being bet seems to hint that the Bills' offensive players will be back, and the Lions are still going to be dealing with some of those more recent defensive injuries that they have suffered. Also, the total being bet up because the Bills indoors become a completely different offense. I really like this spot for the Buffalo Bills. And I'll tell you what, I wake up, I do the show, I want it to be as professional as possible for everybody because I know everybody's listening to the show for different reasons. 1-3 last week sucked, and the loss on KC was demoralizing. I woke up Monday morning after a losing week, and it's usually pretty rough. I felt ready to go because I'm looking at the board, and there's 3 sides that I liked quite a bit, and it feels like 3 of the better bets this week in the last couple of weeks as well. I hope that translates into something come Sunday, and I hope people can see the conviction in it. And I'm really hoping that these come through because these look like great spots. The first was Houston. The second here was the Buffalo Bills, and we'll talk about the other one in just a couple of seconds. Indianapolis on the road at Denver. Fun total to look at. There was pro money yesterday on the Colts at 4.5 that wiped that off the board. We're now down to 4 on the Broncos. This total, again, I'm looking at totals that could have potentially been faked yesterday. 43.5 got to 42.5. We're out to 45 at Chris. Sharpest books were pushing this total up. We talked about this as the ugly game over. Playoff profile, big win probability shift, win or loss. These were flying over last year. This is certainly being bet like it's one of those so far this week. And again, you look at where some of the under money originated at. You look where the wave of over money came in, very similar to KC, Cleveland. But this one has that playoff profile to it where one team is on the verge of elimination, the other is playing for contention, and you just see pass rates in these games go up, and the defensive matchup certainly friendly for it. And so this was another one of a handful of totals moving yesterday over that certainly stood out to me. Tampa Bay on the road at the LA Chargers. LA 3 and a soft 3 across the board. Tampa Bay without Antoine Winfield, one of the better safeties in the NFL, suffers an injury. He is week to week. Chargers and their offensive injuries, still too early to know. We'll get more information on those guys later today. Looked ugly for Disley and how he went down and how he quickly went off the field. We know Dobbins isn't going to be out there. Big question still on Ladd McConkey. New England on the road at the Arizona Cardinals. 6.5s wiped out in favor of the New England Patriots, down to a flat 6 this morning. 2-point move on the total from 44 up to 46. The third of those spots that I like this week for sides, the Green Bay Packers on the road at Seattle. We release Green Bay minus 2.5. It is out to a flat 3 across the board. Total from 47 down to 46.5. Romeo Doubs still in the concussion protocol, but this is, again, the week after with extra time. We'll see on Wednesday what his practice designation will be. If he is not there on Wednesday, I would expect he's probably eligible for IR with that injury. Unclear expectations at this point on what we are getting out of Romeo Doubs. This is a game I'll talk about in great deal come Wednesday. I was really surprised to see this not reopen 3, and that was really part of what gets me in here. But I still think that this is a game where the Seahawks have looked great defensively, but to get to where this price was, and just the Packers' only downfall this season has been the Eagles in the NFC North in the division. Outside of that, these NFC North teams have just looked awesome against other opponents. And Seattle in this win streak has been thriving in their own division. This to me is a class mismatch, and we are going to see the Packers take advantage of that Seahawks offensive line, but also on offense really take advantage of the Seahawks defense using play action, which is where the Seahawks defense can really be tested. And to me, LaFleur has the answers for this McDonald defense. And so at 2.5 here, I'm quite looking forward to having that Green Bay ticket in the account. Chicago on the road at Minnesota. Vikings out to a soft 7-point favorite across the board, up from 5.5 on the reopen. Vikings money so far coming into the market. The question is, we think about last week with Atlanta. Minnesota closes minus 6. Now out to a soft 7. Where do you rate Atlanta relative to the Chicago Bears? get to a pretty easy conclusion on what you're looking to bet in this game. 42 up to 44 on the total. And then it is Atlanta on the road at the Las Vegas Raiders. This will be a Desmond Ridder start for the Raiders. Atlanta out to a 4.5-point favorite. Total in this game holding steady at 44. So 3 sides so far this week. Houston at home. Buffalo on the road as a short dog. And Green Bay on the road Sunday Night Football in Lumen as a 2.5-point favorite. Plenty more to come this week, I believe. It's looking like a good week and certainly would like to have one myself. And hopefully that is what comes through to everybody listening on the podcast as well. I hope everybody has a fantastic Tuesday. We'll chat with you guys again bright and early tomorrow morning on the podcast feed.